So for those of you that were tuned in on for the last satsang, which was Friday night or Friday morning, depending where you are, I suggested that today would be a question and answer session based on the topic we spoke of, or I spoke about on Friday. Now, the unfortunate thing was it's become apparent after the broadcast that the internet was not very strong. Hopefully it's fixed itself now. And so I don't know how many of you were able to stick with the topic on Friday. It's been re-uploaded onto YouTube, and it should publish in the next 10 hours or so. And it is titled, "What is the Universe?" I think it's an interesting topic. It's not different from what is normally spoken about. Normally what is spoken about ties into the model that I put forward. And so we'll see how we go with questions today around the topic that was spoken about on Friday. So I'll recap. Essentially, I think I was describing in response to a question, what is the universe? A model that I subscribe to that would say this is what the universe is. Now, as many of you know, I've often pointed out that whatever is spoken is a concept, not the truth. That whatever has been written down or spoken by me, by anyone in the past or anyone in the future will be a concept. And that concept is being delivered through a particular body-mind organism, a relative instrument, the thinking that goes behind the concept, the observation that leads to the thinking that turns into the concept is all relative. The topic that that question is being answered in relation to is the topic of happiness for the human being in daily living. So relative to another topic, it might be appropriate to answer the question, what is the universe, in a different way. So all that being said, essentially I'm saying that the proposition that the universe is X, Y, and Z is not something that I hold as absolute truth, but rather a model that makes sense to run with. We have to live as if the universe is one way. We do live as if the universe is one way. And we may also find that in theory, we can see that even though we live as if the universe is one way, that it may in fact be something different from a different dimension or on a different dimension. And so I think a unified model that holds both the practical experience of life and what we can deem to be maybe more or another side of the nature or the structure of the universe outside of just the practical daily living. So a model that holds both is a model that I think makes sense to run with if it makes sense to you. It's no point running with a model of life. A model doesn't necessarily mean just an intellectual model. It starts off as an intellectual model, but then becomes one with how you know and experience life. Believe it or not, we're all running around with models of life all the time. We might be conscious of what our model is, but our model translates into our experience of life. And as our models get refined and changed, that refining of the model, in a way, refines our sense of self, which is contained within the model that we have of life. Now, we might have an intellectual model that is different to our deeply ingrained model. And actually, it's not necessarily different. It's part of our deeply ingrained model, but we can have an intellectual model that is different, or that part of our deeply ingrained model says the model is something that is different from how we actually live. Ideally, our model becomes integrated on all levels, and we know ourselves and live life according to that model. And if that changes, then it means our model of life has changed. So essentially, if someone were to ask me, what do you think life is? I would say, well, I think life is a dream or a experience arising within consciousness. It is essentially a simulation or a model that is being created by an organism that exists inside, or an organism that exists as part of an objective reality. And so essentially the model is created by the organism in the objective reality, and a character is superimposed in that model of the external world. And so the organism essentially knows itself inside the model it creates, which really means that Roger, or whoever is there listening, is essentially the main character of that particular experience of life. And in theory, I would say that that main character is a representation of the actual organism that exists prior to the model. And so the model I run with is that there is an external world with an objective reality, time and space, and some sort of causality. And I suspect that it's not just a reality of causality, but includes the sort of deep quantum physics dimensions that we are able to observe from within the simulation. And beyond that, where did the physical world come from, is an unknown and not necessarily that relevant to what we're really looking for in practical terms, which is happiness for the human being. And the human being, from our point of view, is actually the character in the simulated world. What do I mean by simulated world? I mean the image of the world that is received by the entity that is in the external objective world, and so it is picking up all of the stimuli. We would assume in much the same way as is represented in the model that is created. So I would assume that the external organism has eyes and ears, nose and mouth. And so in the way I relate to it, the experience of Roger is the person inside the simulated world created by the external organism. And Roger is supposedly a reflection of that external organism. However, Roger that populates the simulation or the simulated world doesn't actually get to know Roger that exists in the objective reality. So in practical terms, we have to live, we always will be the simulated character in the simulated world. There's no reason to think that that simulated character in the simulated world is radically different from the external reality. The assumption is that the simulated world is somewhat correlated to the external reality and is dependent on the complexity of the organism as to what quality of simulation it can create. And the sense of self is created as part of that simulation, and that's why it can change. That's why we can go from an experience of a person, which is the simulated person in the dream, that experiences life with a sense of heaviness, a sense of suffering, a particular sense of self. And that person can essentially change. It actually is changing every moment. It is being recreated moment after moment after moment. But generally speaking, it will get recreated in a consistent manner until such reason as the brain of the person or the organism in the real world decides to create the modulation differently. And now it doesn't decide just out of a whim. It changes, and therefore the modulation changes, the simulation changes. And so we can assume that there is some sort of feedback loop between the simulation and the main character. And so what happens in the simulation is what is happening outside, and what we are aware of feeds back into the organism and can change the neurology, which can then create changes in the simulated experience. So in practical terms, we might realize that we're living in a simulated world. If we do realize that that's probably or what's happening, that the daily living is an experience arising in consciousness. If we realize that, we might for a while think that our mission is to know the external objective reality. Now, to me, that's not possible. The external objective reality gets known in the simulation. That I would also in the model guess that evolution has created the human being that is in the objective reality with such a complexity that it now also is capable of creating the simulation of the external reality, which is how it knows what it is like to be a human. Without that complexity, it wouldn't be aware of itself. It would still be functioning out there, much like a tree functions without the assumption is that the tree doesn't have awareness. However, it has a limited awareness, i.e. it biologically will be able to sense all sorts of things, water and other trees and the sun, and it moves towards the sun. And because it's all very slow, we think that maybe it's not really functioning in life. But it is, and a human being without the capacity to create a simulation of the external world would still be able to function to whatever extent the senses can pick up stimuli and know not to go towards one and to go towards another, etc. And that can be all very automatic. The fact is that it seems like human beings have developed with a capacity to create a simulated version of life. Now, there are other models that would say that there is no human being outside the simulation. The simulation is actually arising within the mind of God, and that everything is consciousness and there is no objective reality. That's just a different model. And as I pointed out in the Satsang last time, we might think when there are certain awakenings and even stabilized groundedness in a certain way of being, that now we have first-hand proof that there is no objective world. And I suggest that is when we are interpreting our experience and not appreciating that experience could be the result of something different to what we're assuming it's the result of. So often we have these awakening experiences where we realize that everything is arising in consciousness, that there is no separation, that everything is made of consciousness. We can be grounded in that. So it's not just an awakening experience for 15 minutes or an hour. We can spend our life living in that appreciation, and yet our intellect can maybe think that is proof that there is no external world. And from my own experience, I think I had to question that and go beyond it. So the model I currently run with is a mixture of the traditional non-dual model, and in philosophy that's very close to the idealism model, and a blend of the dualist model, which says there is a material world and there is a mental world. And so if you squeeze those together, you end up with the idea that there is a material world, and the material world has created a simulation of that material world within a field of consciousness. And so I found that you don't lose any of the benefits of the idealism model. You still get to rest in being, remain grounded, feel a connection to others, feel like everything is arising inside of a consciousness, rest out of knowing yourself as a human being in meditation. So all of that's available, and at the same time we get to include the causal and the appreciation of having to live life in this world as if it is real, because having come to see that it is a simulated world in nature, a simulated experience, reality which is not there, let's say, in deep sleep and changes radically in the dream state. For all intents and purposes, we can't escape this world, and we have to continue living as the human being until such time as the body dies. And when the body dies, the simulation dies with it. And so then there's no more question about living daily life. So in practical terms, when everything gets fully integrated, the notion that this is a simulated world becomes rather irrelevant, except for the times when resting in our essence is particularly important. And why is that resting in essence not particularly important all of the time? And the reason is because once the belief in doership and attachment to outcomes have fallen away, the suffering which arises in the simulated world, because we have an idea of ourself as being something different to what we actually are. We believe that we are as the character, the doer of everything that happens. We see the other characters as the doers of everything that happens. And we believe that the purpose of life is to achieve things, to gain things, because we believe that happiness will come from that movement. And so as life becomes seen more clearly, those notions tend to be seen to be out of line with what's actually going on. That means that the model, the simulation, the dream, then changes accordingly. And the sense of self, the person in the simulation, knows themselves differently, which means the model that is being created now has inserted a different sense of self, a sense of self that is no longer taking what happens in life as personally as it did before. And so then the experience changes. And so once the experience has changed, once the person essentially has been rewired, recreated differently, resting in being is something that is built into us and forgotten. And forgotten in a good way. It means that we don't have to keep reminding ourselves, keep drifting out of life. We can engage in life and find that the suffering based on the belief in doership and attachment to outcome no longer arises. And why this model, I think, works well is because it then means that there is reason for us to engage in life, to continue to do those things that we enjoy, to continue to connect with others, and in fact, to find that deep down, we'll start finding those things that seem most important. And one of the situations that tends to ignite an intuition inside of me about what is most important is when I experience people helping other people in situations where they don't have to. So when someone is ill, I remember being quite ill at one point and being helped through, I was getting on an aeroplane and I was in a wheelchair, and people were helping me in a way that was very touching. And when I see representations of the same theme in movies where the underdog is really struggling and has a commitment to keep going, and you can see that it's not really going to work out with him on his doing it on his own or her doing it on her own, but there's a commitment, and then somehow people come together, or there's a when people pitch in and the job gets done, there's a strong resonance in seeing that, and so as that starts to become more and more revealed, then maybe that becomes the direction as life allows, of the activities that we engage in. And if we don't have a model that appreciates the fact that maybe there is also an actual objective reality where it makes sense for a human being to engage in developing things and attending to activities, then we might find ourselves disconnected from life. So on that note, we'll see if we've got any questions. Hi, Ray.
Hi, Roger. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Hello.
My question is a question I tried to ask you for a long time, and it is related with this subject, I think. Why we are individuated? Why we feel like we are individuals? Because in this moment I feel both. I feel at the same time I am an individual, let's say in daily life. And I feel that I'm part of the whole, let's say, impersonal self, more in meditation. And I'm still struggling with this, how to integrate these two opposites in daily life.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're opposites, actually. I think that they are complementaries, and that when we investigate the description I've put forward of what life is, what the universe is, then it makes sense, because if we say there is an objective reality, meaning there is an Earth that has a physical reality in a spatial universe, and on Earth there are all of the life that we know, trees and rivers and rocks and stones and other animals and other human beings, then and yet what we are experiencing is a simulation of that external world created within our minds. And so there is a sense of individuality, because in the real objective reality, there is an individual. There is a separate human being that is separate from other human beings. However, that human being is not separate from the earth, in that, we've heard in certain religions, in the final rites at funerals, it's from ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And in some of the Eastern traditions, they talk about the five elements. The human being is essentially made up of the five elements, which is suggesting that the human being is essentially a complex expression of the physical universe. And living cells are also a complex expression of the physical universe. They are so you have the inert or inanimate physical universe, and at some point life became part of that, and then developed into complex life forms. And so the complex life forms are essentially not separate from the whole ecosystem. The whole ecosystem of Earth and this atmosphere, and then Earth is part of a much bigger system, which is the galaxy, and then the galaxy is part of a much bigger system, being the universe. And so it makes sense that when the sun shines on us and we absorb the sun, you close your eyes and you feel the warmth. You really aren't separate from the sun. If you were separate from the sun, you wouldn't be able to receive it. The act of receiving it means you are not separate from it. Which also then means, well, should we say we receive it? Because receiving it implies two, the one that didn't have it and then receives it. And so this is the paradox, which is not, they're not opposites. They are, to me, they're just looking at the whole from two different perspectives. And both perspectives are true. When you look at the human relative to another human, we are separate from that human on an individual level. When you zoom out, both humans, or all humans, are part of the biosphere. So I think that that's very much why we have this double feeling, a feeling of connection to life, because we're not separate from it, and at the same time a sense of individuality, because we do have our own specific preferences and biological makeup that is different from the other person, but not separate from life ultimately.
Yes, I understand much better. Keyword is complementary.
Exactly, yes. If we don't understand that we can have complementaries because of different layers, we will put them onto the same dimension. They don't make sense on the same dimension. Whereas if you just separate them out onto different layers, it makes sense.
Yes, it's very confusing for me because I just whole life I'm living just with one way of thinking, and this is something new for me. And two dimensions together, that's something strange.
Yes, well, in a way, all of life is made up of very many layers. You can keep going down deeper and deeper, and you start seeing layers after layers after layers.
Yes.
That have less complexity as you go down. So the top layers are made up of the lower layers, with so that you go from crude patterns to, how do I explain it?
They intertwine somehow.
Yeah, you can take an object and remove the layers and break it down into very many layers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, that answers my questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hello, Florencia.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask you, which is the basic, or which are the basic beliefs that we should, that life should stop for us to have peace of mind?
Can you just move your microphone around because I'm having trouble hearing you?
Yes.
Okay, can you say that again?
Yeah. I would like to know, can you listen?
It's a bit better, but it's a bit...
Which are the basic beliefs that life should stop for us to have peace of mind.
Right. The basic belief that creates suffering is the belief that you are the doer and that your happiness is to be found in outcomes. So if that belief is what is deeply ingrained as our sense of self, meaning if we know ourselves as a human being, because that's how we experience ourselves in life as a human being, and we're convinced that we are functioning as a human being because we are in control and we either do very well or we do very badly. That is, unfortunately, in my way of seeing it, not the reason that we function. We don't function because there is a agent doer that is making things happen. But if we believe that there is this agent, this doer, then we're going to feel inadequate when things don't work out. We're going to feel pride when things do work out, and we're going to blame the other when things don't work out. All based on the belief in personal doership. And furthermore, if we think that what we are is a person or an identity or a organism that needs to wait for happiness in the future and needs to do things and needs to get things and get somewhere in order for happiness to be there. Basically, the belief that my happiness is to be found outside of myself in the future, then that also is a mistaken identity, and both of those mistaken identities will translate into attitudes towards life. The attitude of guilt, blame, and pride, and the attitude of attachment and desire, and resistance. So attachment, desire, and resistance are all interconnected. And those attitudes, the guilt, the blame, the pride, the worry, the anxiety, and the expectation are all very uncomfortable, and they can fall away. They can stop being there if life brings about changes in the body-mind organism. If the body-mind organism changes, then essentially the sense of self changes. The idea of personal doership and attachment to outcome can dissolve. And then we find that when we wake up in the morning, the attitude to life is different. Hopefully an attitude that doesn't lead to suffering. But if there is suffering there, hopefully it might not be the case, because if the suffering is there, the doership and attachment to outcome is in place. But if the suffering is there, hopefully at some point we start surrendering to the suffering, realizing that even the suffering is not something that I am doing, because we maybe will start to be getting glimpses or have a deepening understanding that I'm not the doer, I am a result. And if the result knows itself as a result, the result stops trying to think itself as the cause. And that's the problem at the moment. At the moment, the result, meaning who we are a result. I'm not talking about the words that come out of our mouth or the meal that we make. That's a result of a result. But we, as we are, before we start making the meal, let's say, we are a result. And the result thinks it's the cause. So when the result stops thinking it's the cause and realizes it's the result, it stops trying to change the result. When the result thinks it's a cause, the result keeps trying to change the result. And that's frustration and resistance.
Okay, so that's the basic belief. Then we can go on and going deeper in investigating about the universe and all of that. But the basic belief is that was the one of doership the one of non-doership. That will bring peace of mind, the most important belief that we must, that the character, the entity, should proper way is that belief. Then we can go deeper, but the basic thing is that one. I want to ask that.
Yes, that's right. The basic belief that's the problem is the belief in personal doership. It needs to, in time, change to the what we could call the belief of non-doership. The belief of non-doership really means just the dissolving of the belief of doership, where we just see, I simply cannot be the doer. I am a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so I didn't create the result. I am the result. So I simply cannot be the doer. And that then means the end of the belief of personal doership. It doesn't really mean you go around saying, I am not the doer. It just means that the belief I am the doer has been extracted. And that is a slow process sometimes, because essentially it's a relearning. The organism has incorrectly learnt that it is the doer, and now it's up to life and its observation of life to result in the diminishing of that belief that I am the doer. And those observations are not anyone's doing. They are just, I don't know, if you know how to read a language and someone puts a sign in front of a computer, let's say a computer knows how to read English only. It's been taught how to read English signs. You put a sign in front of it and the computer says stop. If you put a sign in front of it in Greek, for example, the computer sees the sign, but it doesn't have the programming inside to say that means stop in Greek. And the human being, it's the same. A stimuli or information is given to us, or a reaction happens in daily life, and we either realize, because of our design, that is proof or an indication that we are not the doer, or we don't. Depends on how we are shaped in that point in time. And when we start finding our shape, our design, such that we see these things and it starts reinforcing that we're not the doer, then that is happening. It's not our doing. It just means life has made us, has programmed us to be able to read the sign. And the sign is, oh, that was a happening. The words happened. The feelings happened. The thought happened. Right? So once awareness starts landing on that, it's because the body-mind organism has changed. It's been prompted by life. Roger, as part of life, has said, you realize your thoughts are happening. Your feelings are happening. And so then we start seeing it. And hopefully the understanding goes deeper and deeper.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Florencia.
Bye. Bye.
Hello, Holger.
Hello, Roger. Satsang is quite an amazing invention.
Yes, it's like a maths class, but just a different subject.
But first of all, it's beautiful to see all the people come, the same people coming back. It's such a, it just feels very beautiful. I cannot explain it. There's a familiarity, and I mean, you spin my mind, you blow my mind with the things you say, but at the same time, I am here, I hear you, and in many things I maybe don't agree with you, but it doesn't really matter because it's not about the things you say, but it's about I am, about me being here and now, and getting in touch with something that is below my usual space of operations, of my usual understanding, and so to go beyond thinking and feeling.
Yes, I agree. We can say, who cares? Who cares what Roger is saying? Especially if and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Like, if we don't agree, we can either go into a big fight with it, and then we might realize, oh, I'm suffering. Or, as you say, if we have a connection to something which is what life is really about, we say, who cares? And drop into that.
In a loving, I mean, but it's important because what you say is important because you pick up everyone. I mean, you gently just pull in people back into this place of surrender in a way, because who can keep up with what you are saying? I mean, you have such a mental capacity that just makes people spin. I mean, I don't know how this works.
That was, you know, there are a couple of teachers in history, I think, that have used that on purpose. I don't do it on purpose. But Osho is one teacher that definitely kept saying so many contradictory and confusing things, and going round and round in circles where you really don't know what the point is. And he used to do it on purpose, you know, just to get the mind to surrender.
That's
I give up. I give up.
I mean, Trump does the same on a different level.
Say that again.
The politician Trump, he does the same, just on a different level. But I like the atmosphere and the dignity of how you do it, and it's just beautiful, and it deeply resonates in me. And just to go back, what's the universe? I just look up here Google, and to separate the word in uni, which just means one, and verse meaning rhythm and rhyme. So to me, it feels like there's always a coming in and out of the unborn and then being again in existence. This is for me like always the vibrating. It's almost happening at the same time, very fast. And I really don't know what I'm talking about, but the peace you talk about, you say peace is peace of mind in daily living. It's the benchmark. So it's our recalibrating tool in a way. It helps us to bring us back to our natural state. So, but the peace of mind, it's not something static. I mean, it seems always like to vibrate. I cannot be in this place of peace. I just always get pushed out again through my attention.
But that's only because suffering comes in, right?
Yes. So, but there is no static. Sorry.
Well, it depends what you mean by peace of mind. It could be that you've experienced certain states that are not necessarily what I would call peace of mind, but which are peaceful, and which maybe are more than peaceful. Maybe they're quite pleasant. And you might be thinking that that's what peace of mind is. And if it's not the peace of mind I'm talking about, but maybe it's easily mistaken for it because it may share some characteristics that are mistaken for what I'm saying, then there is a chance that what you're talking about, resting in peace of mind, for example, may be something different to peace of mind. Because on one level, we could say that the peace of mind can be what you could say is constant or consistent, because it's simply the absence of something. So if something is always absent, as in suffering is always absent, then you by default have constant peace. And what's not constant is the content, is the flow of life, is the circumstance. And so once again, we can create a sort of layers of life, the circumstance and the peace of mind. So the peace of mind can be consistent. However, we know that even though in theory peace of mind can be consistent, very often it's not. So I'm just throwing it out there because it's very easy to mistake beingness for peace of mind. And beingness can be dropping into being can be very helpful to establish peace of mind, but at some point we need to differentiate the two.
Can you say more? I mean, peace of mind and being, what separates them, or what's the difference?
Well, being is a little bit more of what I would say is a state or even something in the experience of it's almost got a quality to it. It's if someone is resting in being, and I describe peace of mind as the absence of suffering, it doesn't quite gel for the person that is experiencing being. They're sort of going, well, it's a bit more than just the absence of suffering, isn't it? And I would say, well, no, peace of mind is just the absence of suffering. But if you're resting in being, then I would expect someone to say, well, it's a bit more than just the absence of suffering, isn't it? Because being is not the absence of suffering. Being is the absence of suffering and a sense of self, like a palpable sense of self. And for a long time, that is the equivalent of peace of mind, because it's where we drop out of. When we drop out of suffering, we drop into being. And so that seems like our peace of mind. But I would say that's more than peace of mind. That's peace of mind plus being. So then what does just peace of mind look like? Just peace of mind is when suffering isn't there. You're doing whatever. You're driving your car or washing the dishes or talking to a friend. There's no suffering, but there's no, you're not dissolved into beingness. You're not just vibrating in and feeling your nothingness. You're just carrying on a task free of suffering, and you're not even necessarily aware that you're free of suffering. And then if someone told you, oh, for the last 5 minutes, have you been suffering? And you go, no. Have you been resting in being? No, I was just writing a list of things to go to the shop and get. And I go, oh, that's peace of mind. And we might think, oh, but I've been spending all this time in being. And, then I get frustrated sometimes when I can't find this beingness. And maybe it's frustrating because that beingness might not be there in continuous unbroken form. Maybe it's not meant to be there in continuous unbroken form. It definitely is what I would call the halfway house, which means the resting zone in between suffering and peace of mind. And I would say once the belief in doership and attachment to outcome has been completely dissolved, there's much less reason to rest in being. Because often the reason to rest in being is as a sort of means of dropping out of suffering. If the suffering isn't there, we don't need to drop out of it. So we don't need to go to this place of being. And there will be times in the day when we might be tired or just feel like dropping into beingness. And that's available. We can sit and meditate, sit in the garden, and drop into that dimension of being. But that doesn't have to be there 24/7.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You speak about model, that we basically all live in models. To what degree is a model an escape from the deep uncomfortableness?
No, the deep uncomfortableness exists in our model. Because the model is, we might not realize it, but our experience of life is our experience of our model.
Wow, that's an interesting thought. I have to look at this. So a model, we need to operate with each other in certain namespaces. I mean, we have certain playpans intellectually, how we communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a certain discipline to stay in a certain namespace, to not deviate, to not confuse your listeners, or to stay focused on your topic.
You mean for me to do that?
No, just in general. I mean, because sometimes I think sometimes I lack a certain discipline mentally or intellectually to stick with my point I want to make. So then I'm all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay, simplicity is key. I mean, to keep it as simple as possible. Like baby food.
Yes, I agree. If we do get off topic, it means that's just because it's part of our model, part of how we know life. So, if you start to appreciate how important it is to have a topic and to stick with it, otherwise you deviate off into directions and you never address the topic. As you start realizing that's important, essentially that is changing your model. On some level, it's a layer of your model is changing. What often doesn't change is the broad, the bigger structure of the model tends not to change. So the notion that most people have the notion life is an objective reality, we are in the objective reality, and we are experiencing the objective reality directly. That's the model that most people have, and that's the experience of life that most people have. If an investigation happens and it becomes apparent that when we know the book, we're knowing an image in a consciousness created by senses, let's say. And then we realize, I know the image of the book, not the book itself. The book itself is inaccessible to me. I get the processed version of the book. Then that means our model has changed because we've gone from one model to a new model. And we can go from one model to a new model and still not realize that it's important to stay on topic. And so the big broad structure of our model has changed. And then we might still go off left, right, and center. And then we might one day realize, let me stay on topic. And that means, some of your priorities have changed, which means the model we have, which includes our sense of self, has changed. And then we might find we talk relative to the topic we're interested in without deviating.
But the main topic of life is to know him aright. I mean, that's what the Bible calls it. To know him aright is life eternal. I mean, to know the Father, to know, I mean, so isn't this always the topic? Just to come back to I am beyond thinking and feeling?
It doesn't have to be I am. It depends how you interpret those words. Because, for example, on the model I described, the Father is the human being in the external world, and the Son is the image of the person that populates the simulation. And to know the Father in that sense is to know that the source of this modulation is the human with its brain, and that the human with its brain is essentially the Father, and I am a reflection of the Father. I am made in the image of the Father. And, you know, that's a different interpretation of to know the Father. But simultaneous to that, we could say, okay, that the only truth in the manifestation, and the simulation is the manifestation. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am, which you could say is the very key or the very skeleton or core of the human experience. And so if we drop into the I amness, essentially we're dropping out of the problematic realms of the thinking mind. So there isn't, to me, there isn't an absolute interpretation of what or why these things are said, because at different phases, at different parts on the journey, we will relate to I am differently. There will be times when we relate to I am, and our model says that that I am is coming from consciousness of source, and that when I rest in I am connected to the truth. I am connected to that which is real, that which is prior to this manifestation. That's also very valid at certain times when we have certain models running. And I very much appreciate that the journey is a journey of our models changing. There's a lot of value in us having a religious model, and then maybe moving away from a religious model and having a spiritual model, or what we can have, it can be a spiritual model that is still quite based on a core religion, but hopefully some of the dogma has fallen away and we're starting to listen to the religious stories more as metaphors. And so then we can say it's a spiritual model that still very much includes a God. And I feel we need to keep moving away from that. And that doesn't take away the fact that when we move away from a God, we still have that connection to an aspect of life that is what we were calling God, what other people are calling God. And so when we stop calling it God and we stop imagining a God that probably doesn't exist, we still have access to the depth that we had when we were calling it God. Now, I think that that starts to bring us back to an appreciation of what is really going on in life, with less of the fancy explanations, and replacing the fancy explanations with more practical, I guess, explanations that, and they don't disturb the profound dimensions that we can know of the human being. That most people have an issue with letting go of an idea of God, for example, or an idea of love, or because they think it's going to change them into a cold, two-dimensional experience. Whereas I find that those deeper experiences can be a result of less and less misunderstanding. Misunderstanding tends to make our experience of life shallower and shallower. So the less misunderstanding there is, the deeper the experience goes. And so this notion that if I leave God out of it, that life is going to become mundane and the juice is going to go out of it. And I don't think that's the case. There's always going to be space for God because God is the source. Like I'm happy to say I am connected to God. I believe in God. But the God I believe in is a God that someone would say, well, based on what you've told me, this God you believe in, you're a agnostic / almost atheist. When I give the description of God and I say I don't really know that it exists in any particular form, I'm just saying that God is the source of life, the source of me. And I feel connected to God because I'm not separate from life and source. But you know, someone who has a different idea of God will basically say, no, you don't believe in God, you believe in what I would say is no God. And that's simply because their idea of God is very fancy and probably unrealistic.
Because it's maybe just an escape, an attempt to escape the uncomfortableness. That's why we imagine a God somewhere.
Exactly. It's part of our continuation story. You know, if we have a God, then especially a God that's going to judge us after death, at least we're going to be there after death with that story. So I think you're right. I think, you know, as things become clearer and clearer, we really will, by default, things just fall away, our beliefs fall away. And
it's
life
so beautiful. It's so beautiful to be here in Satsang. I mean, this is like party time. This is, it's amazing, and I thank you for this. And it creates such a beautiful atmosphere. I mean, just I cannot explain it. I'm just grateful and thank you.
You're welcome, Holger. Thank you. Hello, Schumann.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, that's good. No, it's just sorry to repeat, your teaching has helped a lot, probably more than I am conscious of. But there is just something I think I'm slightly stuck on, and it does relate to doership. And I think it's, you know, I think this is my model of the world we live in, and I've said it before, that there does seem to be a lot of cruelty in the world we've created. I think before I mentioned the Aborigines, also recently the war in Yemen, and indirectly the West was involved with that. So there's that deceit, and basically that there seems to be a lot of lack of love. And
indeed.
And I think, and maybe this is the error in me, that there has to be some purpose. And I think this is where the doership maybe comes in. There has to be some purpose to what I'm doing on earth, and that, you know, I feel like, and this is the contradiction, that maybe I am responsible, that because you know, that maybe there is something we can do just by connecting more with the quantum level. It feels like a different frequency, and I feel that you resonate more to to love, because there just seems to be an error in this existence. I mean, I've brought this up before, the myth, the Gnostic myth that that there's a, and you say, well, like the myth was that if you don't see this existence properly, it'll seem like an abortion of an existence. The goddess Sophia created this existence, but by herself. It wasn't with a male and female. And that's why there's suffering in this existence. There's duality, there's death, and there's cruelty. There's a lack of love. But I think you say that there's no error. And I think that also makes sense, because it doesn't make sense that a goddess of wisdom would create an error. But at the same time, because of the lack of love, it is like an abortion of an existence. And I feel like the people that, for example, that attend your talks or talks like this, isn't there some kind of purpose? Shouldn't we be, I feel there's a lot more to the human instrument than we're aware of. We're not aware of how advanced the human instrument is. And I think in a way, I'm using somebody else's words, but you said something like, it's Krishnamurti said this, you are the world. So, and the world is you. So basically what happens in this system can affect everything. And I may have misunderstood, but I think you said something using completely different words. Just correct me if I'm wrong. But that's how it...
I think he changed the way you see the world and you change the world, I think is what he used to say, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think Krishnamurti said, you are the world. Yes. So, yeah, I don't know, because at one level, listening to you, it does make me feel very relaxed. Almost, it feels like I'm not. I don't need to be responsible. That I am the result, and there's a big relaxation. And yet I feel that I am responsible, because I'm not using. I feel like my purpose is to be as sensitive as I possibly can, and because whatever I am affects the world. Have I misunderstood something? I feel like I have got a big responsibility.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the world is cruel, that humanity is cruel, that we're probably the most cruel animal on the planet that there is. Probably because of the egoic addition that humans have. So other animals tend not to want to inflict unnecessary pain just for the fun of it. They're really operating on instincts, and humans have this egoic part that takes life personally, locks that away, and sometimes or often responds with hate and self-hate, where we just want to get revenge. And essentially the goal has changed from being a practical goal to being a goal of revenge and hate. And part of success in that is to inflict as much pain on the others as possible in order to try and level the playing field or get ahead. Or so we are cruel. I would say that the purpose is going to be different for everyone. Someone who can't feed themselves and their family, their purpose is going to be just to get enough food and shelter for the day. for people who are above the poverty line, some people's purpose is going to be to try and get more and more pleasure and more success, because their structure believes that that's where contentment and fulfillment lies. And so their purpose has been structured into them by the fact that their belief system says my completeness is to be found in outcomes. And so they're sort of driven to that purpose. I would say that all of those purposes end up failing to deliver. All of the psychological purposes, anything that is driving us to move outward, and in the end, all of that movement gets registered as an uncomfortableness in life. And so the primary thing that needs to get dealt with on a psychological level, so once we're surviving physically, so once we have food and shelter, then the primary thing is to get rid of suffering, because otherwise we're moving on a psychological level towards a purpose that is going to be unsatisfying. And we need to do that to learn that, no, that's not my purpose. Ultimately, it was my purpose in that moment because I was doing it. And then at some point we learn that that is not the purpose of life because I've been doing it for long enough and it hasn't delivered. So most of us have, fortunately, enough experience in life to know that we have aimed at trying to find happiness in the future by achieving things. Some of the things you've tried to achieve have been achieved, and yet it doesn't provide some magical ongoing solution in terms of ongoing happiness. So we all have enough experience, if only our attention and intellect would land on it, to realize happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. And when it clicks, when our intellect and attention clicks on that, then we might turn inward. And when we turn inward, we'll say, my purpose is to be happy. My purpose is to be at peace. My purpose is to be at peace, and that means to just be with what is, because the resistance to what is what I was doing before, was this drive to move outward psychologically. So I don't see any problem with purpose. It just has to be a purpose of no external purpose. Because if we have a purpose of an external purpose ahead of our primary purpose of connecting to ourselves prior to purpose, then any external purpose is going to be essentially infected with the underlying uncomfortableness. So we have to come back. The primary purpose is to be happy, to be connected to ourselves, to know ourselves as complete prior to going out and sorting out circumstance. And then from that base, we can allow ourselves to be lived according to our preferences, according to what drives us. And then we see that there's always going to be circumstance. And so we can have both the primary purpose of peace of mind, which is connection to source, knowing oneself, and then a secondary purpose, which we don't really define ahead of time. We just allow ourselves to be, and then we can say, oh, today my purpose was to build, a trellis for the creeper to grow on. Or today my purpose was to watch a movie. Today my purpose was to make great food and host family members for the day. Today my purpose was to have a car accident.
Yes, thank you. I think I see, because, correct me if I'm wrong, because normally in the normal sense, when we use purpose, there's a slight discomfort, even if it's very subtle, that drives you forth in the world, and that can be a source of corruption. Whereas indeed, there can be a purpose where there's no pain involved, or no attachment to outcome. And that's a more pure action. That's how it seems to me. If there's no attachment to outcome, but you perform an action, the action is more pure because there's no attachment.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
There's a very nice saying that used, let's see if I can get it right, is happiness is not getting what you want, but wanting what you get, which is quite close to this topic we've been talking about. We start off thinking that happiness is getting what I want, and that is this moving forth with a desire, which is really an uncomfortableness that you were pointing at, that is motivating us to move forward and try and get what we want. And the saying says, you know, happiness is not getting what you want, but rather wanting what you get, which means this surrender into the purposeless purpose where we feel content, and at the same time then find ourselves moving, being lived, which means we've learned that our attachment to outcome is an obstacle. And so then we wake up without really a strong attachment to how the day needs to unfold, knowing that it will unfold. And it will unfold not in some, random way. It will unfold pretty much in line with our genes and up-to-date conditioning, which were more or less the same yesterday and the day before. And so we'll find our life unfolding with a certain consistency, meaning, we'll end up buying things at the shop that are more or less in line with what we bought last week, rather than complete random stuff. And so really it comes down to this attitude, which is an attitude of surrender. And we find that with that attitude of surrender, we still move out in the world and find things happen actually much more efficiently than they did when the attachment to outcome was there.
Yes, I think that makes sense. An attitude of surrender means no attachment, as far as I can read it. And once again, the energy is more pure, or the energy flows more smoothly. Whereas when there's attachment, the energy can't really flow. Sorry for using strange terminology, but yes, that's how.
Strange at all. I should say more, let life flow. That's when we feel most at peace, is when we really feel like we're being lived, when we are letting life flow.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you. I think, no, that is good. I think also another thing which does, and it causes a slight fear, because we live in a world which has such a lack of love. There's a deep mistrust, in authority and things like that. And that puts a slight tension in me. Sometimes I think, how am I meant to live rightly in such a world where you have to, things are not as they appear? I know that's the case in nature, but it's even more so in the man-made world, where things are deliberately not as they appear, and you do have to read between the lines. You do have to use critical thinking. But yes, sorry, but what you say does it makes perfect sense.
Good.
And
well,
I think I'll just have to integrate it. But yes, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we'll take 1 or 2 more questions. Hi, Candice.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Candice.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh. Can.
Yes, I could hear you.
Okay. I don't know if my question is that much different, but I feel like there's a difference in my experience between desires and longings. Feels like the more that I've walked on this path, the more lonely it feels in some way. That desire to connect with people from this place of knowing isn't theirs. And I've struggled with it a lot. And it used to be then going out and trying to kind of bring people into my world. And now that's fallen away, but there's still, it feels like I have to kind of tone it down, or I don't know if that's the right word, but there's still this kind of lingering longing, I would say, that's in my heart to really connect from that place. And it feels different than, I don't know if it's different than a desire or if it's still an attachment to outcome, but I don't know if you have anything to say on that, but that's been something that's kind of carried with me. Is it's more of like a longing. And there's some pain to it too.
Well, I think a lot of people would resonate with that. My gut feeling is, and I don't know if I'm right on this, but my gut feeling is that is a form of attachment, because now I don't know if I don't have that longing because I've got a different personality, or because I have companionship in my girlfriend. But the sense is that even if circumstance changed, a sense of something missing wouldn't be there. So, the process, I don't know where you feel you are in the process, but often the process is about these uncomfortablenesses, these attachments, the sense that something is not there that needs to be there. And so a longing sort of, it might be different terminology, but it does seem like a craving in a way, a hoping, with the sense that when it is there, it will complete things, then everything will be okay. That's my gut feel.
Yeah.
But you say the thing is that these things really need to be, well, I don't know if that's what you said, but you're saying you're not exactly sure which one it is. And the thing is that I can throw a light on it without really knowing what it is. At the end of the day, the insight comes from inside as to whether it is attachment or not. There very much is a preference that we might have for something. And so from time to time, we might realize, oh, I haven't had it for a while, but I don't think that not having your preference penetrates down to a very deep level. And a longing for something seems to imply something deeper. But that's just my, my 2 bits worth thrown in. Ultimately, you need to keep feeling it and keeping real with it, and it will reveal itself.
I find I do, it returns and then it goes away for a while, and then it returns, and then I just sit in that kind of heartache for a while and just kind of let it be there without trying to cover it up or distract myself from it. But then there's a couple areas of my life where it just feels like there's something being asked of me that's just not ever kind of manifesting or something. And it keeps bringing me back to this place of feeling the ache of that longing, I guess. Yeah.
even that,
just
I
keeps
would
breaking
say,
the heart more and more open, which I guess is a good thing, but it's, yeah, it's rough.
yeah, I would say these are your, the things that are specific for you to work on. It sounds like when these things keep coming back, one way we could frame it is by putting it into the model that says, there are unresolved pains, sufferings from the past in relation to things that we didn't get or things that we lost, and having a certain attitude to those things lost or not received. And it can be an attitude that was a pattern, essentially, that was put in place even before you were born, something that is through part of the cosmic laws in your system. So you are now processing through that framework. So that makes it easier to see the non-doership of it, if we consider it could have come from even before our lifetime, and it's just been handed down in a sense. Not that whether it came from before our lifetime, or whether it was because of the way we responded to a circumstance. Still, the response to a circumstance when we were younger is essentially not our doing anyway, because we had to respond that way because of our design. But obviously, if it came from before you were even born, it makes it much obvious it's not your doing. And we keep getting drawn back to those unresolved desires and unresolved attachments until they're resolved. So when you say that it comes back intermittently and there's a heartache, I would very much encourage a continuous feeling with curiosity, not even curiosity on the outside. So before it's happening, to know that it's very interesting to know what these energies are, and then when the energies come up, it's just a surrender to that, being there as you said you do, and completely allowing the energy to flow when it flows, which often, if you get out of its way and you just allow words to come out, it will reveal layers of that energy that are inaccessible, or have previously been accessible. And when they come out, sometimes it's extreme sadness, extreme hatred. Often it's things that we're afraid to be open to, because our system is convinced that if we see certain hatred or certain sadness, that surely is bad for me to know about. And so we don't want to acknowledge it, don't want to feel it. In fact, it feels like it will kill us. And so something needs to counter that attitude to those feelings, and really surrender and understand that flow of that energetic load needs to flow, and needs to flow outward, which sounds like you're onto that, but
Yeah.
it can be an ongoing
And
process.
I spend time just I think it's kind of what you're saying is holding this space with a very gentle question, like if it has something to reveal or show me, and it's been years of just like silence, like it doesn't really, but it keeps coming back. So I guess all I can do is just be with it. And yeah. I don't know if that's where you were going with the curiosity piece, but it's kind of how I've been working with it.
Yeah. It's, I don't know if you've ever tried things like massage can maybe move things around a bit deeper, and maybe even some complementary sort of spiritual practices, like, I don't know, putting yourself in intimacy situations, not necessarily man woman, but where you are working with another person in terms of talking about deep emotions or connecting. Often if you do that with another person, you can push yourself past certain comfort zones, especially in workshop type scenarios where you're being guided past comfort zones, but in a safe and healthy manner. So I also think these things, you'll come across the flyer on the local notice board when the system's ready for.
Yeah. I do those things. I'm a counselor, so yeah, I know they do help. Yeah, it's been a very lonely journey for me. It's like everything fell away. Like my friends just kind of fell away. It's, yeah, all the kind of outlets that I had to express myself fell away. Work fell away. It's been sitting in kind of the rawness of it for quite some time. It doesn't come with the same intensity or the, I guess it just doesn't come with the same intensity, but it's still, or same as frequent, but it still comes, and there's still like that raw feeling to it at times. But
yeah, I think these things run deep. Yeah, but so at least, I mean, I guess when it's not there, you don't worry about it, right?
no, yeah, I feel it feels whole and complete. Like sometimes it feels like nothing's needed and it feels so great. And then that longing sometimes will just, I don't know what's triggering it, but it'll just kind of surface again.
And then it moves on. So I know that especially when the energy is flowing, we tend to get, when that heavy or uncomfortable energy is there, we tend to get wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
And remembering, so who cares, just can be a reminder in it. At some point, maybe we just need to even not be curious about it. Ironically, so there's a time to be curious and to feel it, and then there's other times where we see it's there and there is the potential to snap out of it, which is not something we can do all the time at all. If someone says just snap out of it when the energy is not in a snap outable sort of way, that is completely unhelpful. And yet there are times, so I'm not saying you can snap out of it, but there are times when just a thought will snap you out of it. And that also is part of the movement, is to really find a part of our system that where the energy has diminished sufficiently that we can snap out of it. And there's times when we're not meant to snap out of it and we're meant to feel it. And but it sounds like you're familiar with this, and it's just an ongoing process for the time being.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at discerning when I need to sit with it and when to move away. But the reason why, I guess why I distinguish the two is because desire feels like, to me, it feels like there's a graspy quality where I'm trying to, my attention moves outward and I'm trying to control or manipulate things. And it doesn't feel like that necessarily comes with it has at times, but the longing feels like it's coming from a different space. I guess that's where my question came from, because I don't feel that same kind of manipulative quality to it that's coming from it. But
bear in mind that there's also a difference in a way between so having lost something can create a sadness if the attachment is an attachment that gets put in place because something has been taken away or lost, that's much more likely to create a longing than when, let's say, someone is looking for things that they don't have and haven't had,
Yeah.
and is trying to get things they think they need because they haven't tasted them before. So it could be that this is more linked to a sadness than a pride or a sense of needing more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Yes, thank you so much.
we'll take this as the last question. Hi, Martin.
I think you can hear me now, can't you?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Well, hi again. Thanks very much. And you said something today that really resonated with me. There's always something new, different perspective. And what you said was, I'm a result, not a cause. I thought that was absolutely, that sort of nailed me, really. That, you know, I'm here talking to you now as a result of my genetic makeup and my up-to-date conditioning. This is my purpose, to talk to you now. It's because I've got this. I may have told you before that you know, 10 years ago, my entire life fell apart, and what Candice was saying really resonated with me. I just thought, my God, yes, that we sort of, as children, we're traumatized, and then at some stage in our adult life, we go on this outer journey, and you know, we have our ups and downs, but generally, you know, life just falls into place until you come to a point, which obviously Candice did the same as me. Everything that you put a value on leaves your life pretty much, and that's particularly traumatizing in itself. But you know, I've still got this background. I don't know what to do. You know, I've really got to do something. Is this thought? I've really got to do something to get back into life and start making money again. And at some stage in the future, conditions will change in order that I feel complete. I see that. But recently, I read something this morning that a friend of mine sent to me. It was about this disconnection from your life force, or from source, or from your true self. And we've talked about this before. I think you call it your biological intelligence that you link into. And the concept that was put forward in what I was reading this morning was that as children, when we're very small, is we face conditions that we cannot deal with. You know, whether we're abused, it's emotions that come up, feelings that we really can't deal with, and what we do is we freeze and anesthetize ourselves, and that anesthesia then creates a block between your source or your biological intelligence, and you then don't know what to do. And it's quite interesting. You said these things come up when you're talking to Candice. These things come up, and people say to you, "I'll snap out of it." And what this concept was saying this morning was, what you've got to do is to feel into it, which you couldn't do when you were small, when you were a child or younger.
Yes.
And
Yes.
That. And this is the journey, I think, is this God's will living you, that when these things come up, that don't try and snap out of it. You almost have to snap into it and just feel it and take the pain. I think Candice said, just gently question it. So I guess my question, what do you think of that concept, that it's this freezing, this anesthesia that disconnects you from life living you, as it were?
Yes, the sense of self that believes itself to be that which has been attacked on a fundamental level because of outcomes, and that could have happened when you were very young, being outcomes that you couldn't deal with because it was received as such an attack. And that then strengthens what we would call the doership identity. Historically or traditionally, it might be the egoic identity that gets put in place. And then we live through that identity, and that identity is much more disconnected because it just doesn't appreciate its connection to source. But it's not necessarily to do with just with circumstance. I think it's the circumstance can exacerbate it if someone has intense circumstance, but simply the way we develop in life, even in fairly ordinary circumstances, still creates a disconnection. And yeah, the more intense the circumstance, the more deeply, I guess, that disconnection can go. And if that sense of self is transcended, meaning we find ourselves connecting to a part of the human being that is fundamental, is there, and being able to return there over and over and realize that, oh, I am whole, even though, in your case, your wife has got a different destiny, and your destinies sort of have diverged. Painful, yes, but that pain can turn into suffering and continue to keep you disconnected from your wholeness, because that story can remain as part of who I am, the person who lost everything 10 years ago. Which is, and so I'm not saying that's criticism, I'm just saying that's how we develop. And if we see that that has become part of who I am, then that's who I'm going to continue to be until something happens that allows for a shift to take place. Now, that thing that happens can be varied, and sometimes it's about feeling the energy, sometimes it's about snapping out of them, sometimes it's about investigating the nature of life as a query, as a investigation using the intellect. And then hopefully all three come together. And so we don't really know on what day or what time each different technique is appropriate. So if we just understand that there is a range of ways of engaging in this seeking, which includes feeling emotions and energies at other times it's more about being the witness to all of that without going into the detail. And at other times it's about inquiring as to what the nature of life is and what the nature of self is, using the intellect and also dropping out of the intellect. So there's this varied set of applications that we can find ourselves being applied to. And change happens if it's destined to happen, but we really do need to see where this sense of self is there a sense of self that includes in it a story that is inherently uncomfortable? And can I know myself outside of that sense of self, outside of that story of who I think I am? Is there a part of me that is free from that? Is there a part of me that is complete and whole in this very moment, in this very circumstance, given the history and given whatever may come in the future? And that's essentially what spiritual teachings have been saying is, yes, the essence of the human being is complete and whole and free right now, and what keeps us disconnected from that is the psychological idea of who we are that is not really honoring our essence, but has been forced upon us by the way that our structure related to life historically, and now's the time to move past that.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you, Roger. It's very, very interesting. I can't disagree with anything you've said, but it's just quickly, a lot of these things can be locked away in the subconscious, and it's extraordinary. It can take decades and decades and decades with inquiry for these things to come up.
Exactly. And you don't know when it's going to, when the right key is going to pop something open.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you, Roger. It's interesting what you said about seeing people help. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh said once, yeah, that's happened. It's dreadful. All those people have been killed and injured, but look at the people helping. You know,
yeah.
the sweetness comes from the tragedy. You know, it's quite extraordinary. So thank you very much, Roger. You helped me an enormous amount. And Candice helped me as well today. Thank you, Candice. When other people share, it's very powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome.